The auction block in Mobile, Alabama on March 12, 1847 was busy with the usual grim business of human commerce. Men, women, and children stood in chains while buyers examined teeth, felt muscles, calculated profit margins. But when a 42-year-old woman named Bessie was brought onto the platform, the crowd actually laughed. Bessie weighed nearly 400 pounds. In an era when enslaved people were valued for their ability to work brutal hours in cotton fields, Bessie seemed worthless. She could barely walk. She wheezed with every breath. Multiple plantation owners had already rejected her. The auctioneer was desperate. "Do I hear 50 cents? 25? Anything?" Then a voice from the back called out 15 cents. The crowd laughed harder. 15 cents, the price of a loaf of bread. It was an insult, a joke bid. But the man who made that bid wasn't joking. His name was Samuel Pritchard, owner of Meadowbrook Plantation. And he had plans for Bessie that nobody could have imagined. Plans that would reveal something about human cruelty so specific, so calculated, that even other plantation owners would be horrified when they learned the truth. What Samuel Pritchard did to Bessie over the next 14 months wasn't slavery as most people understood it. It was something darker. A medical experiment, a spectacle, a horror show that he would invite other plantation owners to witness, charging admission to watch what he had created. This is the story of Bessie, the woman bought for 15 cents, and of Samuel Pritchard, the man whose cruelty would eventually destroy him in ways he never anticipated. What you're about to hear is documented in medical journals, court records, and testimony from enslaved people who witnessed everything. This isn't a story about heroism or redemption. It's a story about the depths of human evil when one person has absolute power over another, and about how sometimes the very cruelty designed to dehumanize someone becomes the thing that destroys the perpetrator. Mobile, Alabama. Spring 1847. Samuel Pritchard was 53 years old and owned Meadowbrook Plantation, a mid-sized cotton operation of 300 acres with 32 enslaved workers. He wasn't among Alabama's wealthiest planters, but he was comfortable, established, respected in Mobile society. He was also obsessed with spectacle. Where other plantation owners focused purely on profit, Pritchard was fascinated by the unusual, the extreme, the shocking. He collected exotic animals. He hosted elaborate parties where he displayed oddities he'd purchased during travels to Europe. His library contained books on anatomy, medical abnormalities, circus freaks, and human exhibition. This obsession had darkened over the years into something more sinister. Pritchard had begun to see enslaved people not just as labor but as potential subjects for his experiments and exhibitions. He'd purchased a 7-foot-tall man and displayed him at parties like a curiosity. He'd bought conjoined twins and kept them in a special cabin where visitors could pay to see them. But those exhibitions had grown stale. Pritchard wanted something new, something that would make him famous, or at least infamous, among Alabama's planter class, something that would demonstrate his power over human life in ways that pure economic exploitation couldn't. When he heard about Bessie being auctioned in Mobile, Pritchard saw an opportunity. Bessie had been born into slavery in Mississippi around 1805. For most of her life, she'd worked in plantation kitchens, a position that, while still enslaved, was less brutal than field work. But Bessie had developed a condition that her various owners couldn't understand or didn't care to. She couldn't stop gaining weight. By her late 30s, Bessie weighed over 300 pounds. Her mobility decreased. Her value as a worker plummeted. She was sold twice, each time for less money. By 1847, at 42 years old and nearly 400 pounds, she was considered completely worthless. The man who owned her at that point, a cotton broker named Henderson, simply wanted to rid himself of what he saw as a financial burden. He brought Bessie to auction hoping to get anything at all, even if it meant practically giving her away. That's where Samuel Pritchard found her. After purchasing Bessie for 15 cents, the lowest price anyone at that auction had ever heard for an enslaved adult, Pritchard had her transported to Meadowbrook Plantation. The journey was difficult. Bessie couldn't fit in a normal wagon. Special arrangements had to be made. Other enslaved people whispered that the new owner was either a fool or planning something terrible. They were right about the second option. When Bessie arrived at Meadowbrook, Pritchard didn't assign her to any work detail. Instead, he had a special cabin built for her larger than normal slave quarters, with reinforced flooring to support her weight. He ordered his house cook, an enslaved woman named Ruth, to prepare special meals for Bessie. Large meals. Constant meals. Ruth was confused. "Master, that woman already can't hardly move. You want me to feed her more? As much as she can eat," Pritchard said with a smile that made Ruth's skin crawl. "I want her bigger." "Bigger, sir. She'll die if she gets much bigger. That's my concern, not yours. You'll prepare 3 full meals a day, plus food between meals. Fatty pork, cornbread with butter, sweet potatoes with molasses, anything that will add weight. Understood? Ruth understood that she had no choice. And she understood that something evil was beginning. Over the following weeks, Ruth prepared enormous quantities of food and brought them to Bessie's cabin. At first, Bessie was grateful. After years of owners who resented feeding her at all, here was one who provided abundance. She ate willingly, even eagerly. But Pritchard's plan went far beyond simple feeding. He had studied animal husbandry, the fattening of livestock for market. He'd read about force-feeding techniques used to create foie gras from geese, and he decided to apply these principles to a human being. By the end of the first month, when Bessie's appetite began to decrease as her body reached capacity, Pritchard implemented. The next phase, he began requiring Ruth to bring not just food, but to stay and watch Bessie eat all of it. If Bessie tried to refuse, Ruth was instructed to report it immediately. "You'll eat everything provided," Pritchard told Bessie during one of his daily inspection visits. "This is your only job now. Eat, rest, and grow. Do you understand?" Bessie, who'd spent her entire life following orders to survive, nodded. She didn't understand why, but she understood that refusal would bring consequences worse than the discomfort of overeating. By the end of the second month, Bessie had gained another 40 pounds. She could no longer walk without assistance. Her breathing had become labored constantly. Her body was failing under the strain of the weight Pritchard was deliberately adding to it. And Pritchard was delighted. He kept detailed records in a leather journal, documenting Bessie's weight, measurements, physical condition. He wrote observations like a scientist conducting an experiment, noting how her body changed, how her mobility decreased, how her health deteriorated. But the darkest part of Pritchard's plan was yet to come, because he wasn't doing this in private. He was preparing Bessie for exhibition. He'd sent letters to other plantation owners across Alabama describing his medical experiment and inviting them to witness what he'd created. By summer 1847, Samuel Pritchard was charging admission for other plantation owners and wealthy mobile citizens to visit Meadowbrook and view what he called the Fattened Woman, a human being deliberately expanded beyond natural limit, displayed like a circus attraction for the entertainment of Alabama's elite. The exhibitions began in June 1847. Pritchard sent engraved invitations to plantation owners within a 50-mile radius, witness an unprecedented demonstration of human physiology. The Fattened Woman of Meadowbrook. Admission, $2 per viewer. $2 was a significant amount in 1847, more than most people paid for theater performances or concerts. But Pritchard understood his audience. These were men who'd seen every form of human suffering that slavery produced. To shock them, to provide entertainment they'd never experienced, required something extraordinary. The first viewing was attended by 12 plantation owners and 3 mobile physicians. Pritchard led them to Bessie's cabin like a showman presenting his main attraction. Inside, Bessie sat on a reinforced chair, now weighing close to 50 pounds. Barely able to stand without assistance. "Gentlemen," Pritchard announced with theatrical flair, before you was the result of 4 months of dedicated feeding. "When I purchased this specimen for 15 cents, she was already obese. But through controlled dietary management, I've expanded her beyond what you see in normal human development." He walked around Bessie like a lecturer with a visual aid, pointing out how her body had changed. "Note the distribution of adipose tissue. Observe the respiratory difficulty. Document the complete loss of mobility. This is human physiology pushed to its extreme." One of the physicians, Dr. Morrison from Mobile, was fascinated. He approached Bessie and began a physical examination without asking permission. She was property, after all, not a patient deserving consent or dignity. "Remarkable," Dr. Morrison muttered, checking her pulse, listening to her labored breathing. "Her heart is under tremendous strain. I'd estimate she has perhaps a year before cardiac failure." "Which is why," Pritchard said smoothly, "viewing opportunities are limited. This is a temporary exhibition, gentlemen. Nature will reclaim its due eventually." The casual discussion of Bessie's impending death, as if she weren't sitting right there listening, as if her humanity didn't exist, made even some of the hardened plantation owners uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to leave. They stayed, asked questions, examined Bessie like she was livestock, and paid their $2 on the way out. Word spread quickly through Alabama's planter class. Some were horrified by Pritchard's exhibition and refused invitation, but many were curious, eager to witness something so unusual. Over the next months, dozens of visitors came to Meadowbrook to see the Fattened Woman. Pritchard added elements to make the exhibition more theatrical. He had Ruth bring food during viewing times, so visitors could watch Bessie eat. He provided detailed charts showing her weight gain trajectory. He gave lectures on the science of human expansion, presenting himself as a medical researcher rather than a man torturing someone for profit and entertainment. But not everyone who saw Bessie was entertained. Ruth, who brought food 3 times daily and witnessed Bessie's deterioration up close, was horrified by what was happening. Other enslaved people at Meadowbrook knew something evil was occurring in that cabin, and Bessie herself, who'd spent months being poked, examined, discussed like an object, who'd listened to visitors speculate about how long until her heart gave out, began to understand that Pritchard had purchased her, not to work or even to keep, but to slowly kill for entertainment. By fall 1847, Bessie was bedridden completely. She'd gained approximately 100 pounds since Pritchard purchased her. Her weight was now somewhere around 475 pounds exact. Measurement was difficult because she could no longer stand on scales. Her health had deteriorated catastrophically. She had developed sores from being unable to move. Her breathing was so labored that she gasped constantly. Her heart, as Dr. Morrison had predicted, was failing under the strain. Pritchard knew his exhibition was nearing its end. He began advertising final viewing opportunities to create urgency among potential visitors. The admission price increased to $3 for what Pritchard called witnessing history, the extreme limits of human physiology. But something was changing among the people forced to participate in Pritchard's horror show. Ruth, who'd been bringing food for 9 months, had watched Bessie transform from a woman who could still walk and talk and laugh occasionally into someone barely clinging to life. The other enslaved people at Meadowbrook, who'd heard Bessie's labored breathing through the cabin walls, who'd seen the visitors arriving to gawk at her suffering, had reached a breaking point. They began to plan something dangerous, something that could get them all killed. But watching Bessie die slowly for Pritchard's entertainment had pushed them beyond fear. It started with Ruth reducing the food portions. Not dramatically, Pritchard checked the amounts before they went to Bessie's cabin, but gradually, incrementally. Instead of the massive servings Pritchard ordered, Ruth brought slightly smaller portions. She was careful, knowing that if Pritchard noticed, she'd be whipped or sold. But Pritchard didn't notice immediately. He was too focused on the financial success of his exhibition and on entertaining the stream of visitors who continued paying to see Bessie. Meanwhile, other enslaved people at Meadowbrook began their own small resistance. Joshua, who'd been assigned to maintain Bessie's cabin, started helping her move slightly each day, just enough to prevent the worst bed sores. Miriam, who cleaned the main house, began stealing medical supplies, salves, bandages, anything that might ease Bessie's suffering, and passing them to Ruth. These were tiny acts that couldn't reverse Bessie's condition, but they represented something crucial: a community of enslaved people refusing to be complicit in Pritchard's cruelty, finding ways to preserve Bessie's humanity even while Pritchard tried to reduce her to a spectacle. Bessie herself began resisting in the only way she could. She started refusing food, despite knowing it would anger Pritchard. She'd lived 9 months as his exhibition. She'd endured being displayed, examined, discussed like an animal. She'd heard visitors predict her death date like it was entertainment. She decided that if she was going to die, it would be on her terms, not his. When Ruth brought food one November morning, Bessie turned her head away. "I ain't eating no more." Ruth's eyes widened with fear. "Miss Bessie, you gotta eat. Master find out you refusing, he'll what? Kill me." Bessie's laugh was bitter, but it was the first time Ruth had heard her laugh in months. "I'm already dying. He's been killing me slow since spring. I'm just deciding to do it faster, on my time, not his." "But Bessie, tell him I ain't eating. Tell him his show is over. Tell him I'm done being his monster." Ruth knew this meant punishment, possibly for both of them. But looking at Bessie, this woman who'd been systematically destroyed for entertainment, Ruth couldn't bring herself to force the issue. She reported to Pritchard that Bessie was refusing food. Pritchard's reaction was swift and brutal. He went immediately to Bessie's cabin, found her lying on her bed, her face turned to the wall. "You'll eat what you're given," he said coldly. "No." Bessie's voice was weak, but the word was clear. "I own you. You'll do as I say." Bessie turned her head to look at him directly. For the first time in 9 months, she spoke to him as a person, not as a performing animal. "You bought me for 15 cents. You ain't owned nothing but this body. My mind's still mine, my decision's still mine, and I decide I'm done eating." Pritchard's face flushed with rage. He'd invested months, significant money in feed costs, and his reputation in this exhibition. He had visitors scheduled for the following week. He couldn't allow his prize attraction to starve herself. He tried everything. He threatened whipping, but Bessie was too weak to survive it, and he knew beating her would damage the exhibition. He threatened selling her. But where could he sell someone in her condition? He threatened punishing other enslaved people, but Bessie, 9 months past, caring about anything except ending her suffering, didn't respond. Finally, Pritchard tried force feeding. He ordered Ruth and Joshua to hold Bessie down while he attempted to pour liquid food down her throat. But Bessie had developed a will that 9 months of humiliation had paradoxically strengthened rather than broken. She kept her mouth closed. When they pried it open, she refused to swallow. The force-feeding attempt ended with Bessie choking, Pritchard frustrated, and Ruth crying. Over the next 2 weeks, Bessie ate almost nothing, her body already failing began shutting down rapidly. Pritchard watched helplessly as his investment, his spectacle, his claim to fame among Alabama planters slipped away through an act of will he couldn't control. The scheduled visitors arrived to find that viewing opportunities had been postponed indefinitely. Rumors spread through Alabama's planter class that something had gone wrong at Meadowbrook, that Pritchard's exhibition had failed somehow. On December 3, 1847, 9 months after Pritchard had purchased her for 15 cents, Bessie died. The official cause, according to Dr. Morrison, who examined her body, was cardiac failure brought on by obesity. But Ruth, who'd been with her at the end, knew different. She chose to go. Ruth said to the other enslaved people at Meadowbrook, "Master thought he owned everything about her, but she kept her will, she kept her choice. And she chose to leave on her time, not his." Bessie's death should have been the end of the story, but sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways. Pritchard tried to continue his exhibition business by purchasing another enslaved person he thought he could display, but word had spread about what happened at Meadowbrook. Other plantation owners, even those who'd attended Bessie's exhibition, were now uncomfortable. The spectacle had crossed a line when the victim chose death over continued performance. More significantly, Dr. Morrison wrote a medical paper about Bessie's case. He submitted it to a medical journal in Boston, thinking northern physicians would be interested in the physiological aspects. The paper was clinical, describing Bessie as a specimen and her condition as an experiment in human capacity. The paper was published in March 1848, and it reached audiences Dr. Morrison never intended. Abolitionist newspapers in the North seized on the paper. They reprinted it with new headlines: Southern cruelty, woman tortured to death for entertainment, Alabama planters' human exhibition ends in death. The story became a weapon in the growing national debate over slavery, concrete proof of the system's dehumanizing evil. Pritchard's name appeared in northern newspapers as a symbol of Southern barbarity. His medical experiment, which he'd thought would make him famous among Alabama planters, made him infamous across the country. Letters arrived at Meadowbrook from abolitionists calling him a murderer. Northern churches used his story in sermons about slavery's evil. The social consequences in Alabama were complex. Some plantation owners defended Pritchard, arguing he'd done nothing technically illegal. Bessie had been his property, and owners had absolute rights. But many others distanced themselves, recognizing that Pritchard's extreme cruelty had provided abolitionists with powerful ammunition. Business relationships ended. Social invitations stopped coming. Pritchard found himself isolated even within his own community. By 1850, Meadowbrook Plantation was struggling financially. Workers who might have done business with Pritchard refused. He'd become toxic. In 1852, unable to sustain the plantation, Pritchard sold Meadowbrook and moved to Mississippi, trying to start over. But his reputation followed him. He died in 1856. Alone and largely forgotten except as the man who'd tortured a woman to death for entertainment. The enslaved people of Meadowbrook, including Ruth and Joshua who'd tried to ease Bessie's suffering, were sold when the plantation changed hands. Their fates scattered across the South, most disappearing from historical records. But Bessie's story survived. Ruth, who eventually gained freedom after the Civil War, told Bessie's story to a northern missionary in 1866. That account was recorded, and it provided details that Dr. Morrison's clinic paper had omitted: Bessie's humanity, her suffering, her final act of resistance. Master thought he broke her. Ruth said in that recorded interview, thought he made her into something less than human, just something to look at. But at the end, she reminded all of us she was still a person, she still had choice, and she chose dignity over one more day of being his monster. This is Buried Truths, where we refuse to let these stories disappear. Bessie's story isn't about heroism in the conventional sense. It's about the smallest acts of resistance mattering, about humanity persisting even in systems designed to destroy it, and about how cruelty often destroys the perpetrator as much as the victim. Subscribe so these voices keep reaching people who need to hear them. Comment below: was Bessie's final refusal an act of resistance or resignation? How do we honor people who died in systems designed to deny their humanity? What responsibility do we have to remember stories this painful? Until next week, keep digging for truth.